All right, praise Jesus. My point, and this is the last time I really want to talk about divorce, because if I talk about my divorce, the divorce that occurred in my life, uh, questions come up and answers come up relative to my wife, who is not here to explain her reasoning. So that wouldn't be fair. My only reason for bringing it up is that marriage should be honored by all. That's the point. If my marriage was honored by friends, family, the court, the church, in other words, all the people around us, chances are we'd still be married. And all people need really is a bit of encouragement. If two people get married, at some point in time, they were willing to get married, and somewhere along the way, that willingness turned into an unwillingness to stay together. But there were steps along the way. There were crises along the way. There were um, uh, occurrences that were not forgiven or shouldn't have occurred, and certainly, if marriage is honored by all, outsiders would help patch those situations up. Give advice, and maybe even uh, a little criticism, constructive criticism, if one person is out of line. And sometimes it's both, sometimes it's one. But the point is, my reason for bringing it up was to show how my effort is to make marriage more durable, not by forcing people to stay together um, outside of love, but by encouraging a right relationship all along the way. Now, you're pointing out that Christocracy, perhaps in the school system, would be brainwashing. Well, isn't a lot of teaching, isn't it designed to be helpful and to keep people safe and to keep them from making unnecessary mistakes? In other words, if you teach a young person to look before they leap, or start slow, or walk before crawl before you walk, in other words, suggestions to be careful. Those are good suggestions. I mean, we can't just be reckless and not give that kind of advice, because if you don't give that kind of advice, you're liable to buy a child a bicycle, and then if he happens to be in a hilly environment, he's liable to get on that bicycle and start coasting down a hill and going 40 miles an hour and lose control and could really get hurt. Now, of course, there's a lot of ways of getting hurt. You can um, get involved in things that develop bad habits. So Christianity is it you can rebel against the suggestions, or you can make your life a whole lot easier. Now, I don't see it as brainwashing. I mean, when you take the Pledge of Allegiance, when children are taught the Pledge of Allegiance and they're taught about American history, which is pretty much of a whitewashed rendition of who we are as a people, that's brainwashing. It's not true, and we can see now that what we're capable of. I mean, just look around us. So it's the proof is in the pudding. In other words, if you try it, For years, for hundreds of years, for many, many centuries, many, many decades, even in the United States, the school systems were in Christ. And it didn't seem to do anybody any harm because we got here. Now, the sad thing is that while the school system was in Christ, prejudice was still occurring in the country. And now that we've pretty much dealt with prejudice, we've got this new morality or new immorality to contend with. So we're advancing in some respects, but we're going backwards in others. Now, one of the other points you brought up is what about war? I mean, in a Christian nation, a nation in Christ, should be able to avoid war. Should not focus on weaponry and military superiority for a strong defense. Now that might be hard to believe, but where has our strong defense gotten us? We've become more militaristic. We've relied on it more and more. It's more and more of a burden, and now we're becoming loathed as a people. There are many nations that spend far less per capita than we do, and you wouldn't even think of them as any kind of a threat or in any risk in the world. Many nations have far less of a threat and are good neighbors. So there's not a problem. A nation does not need ultimately, when all nations or most nations are in Christ, there will come a time when we will beat our swords into plowshares and our spears into pruning hooks. In other words, we won't even train for war anymore. No army, no navy, no air force, and many other nations will take the same stand. People will be able to travel freely between nations and live wherever they want, and be a much more peaceful society. Now, there was another point that you were making I wanted to bring up. Well, I didn't take a note on it, so I've lost it. But in any case, oh, I know what it was. Yeah, abortion, the abortion issue. We've come to rely on the right to have an abortion. It's wrong, but when people know that abortion is legal, recreational sex becomes or casual sex becomes more likely. But if abortion is not legal and therefore punishable, people will eventually realize that, hey, I'd better be more careful about, a lot less casual about, my relationships. I really ought to make sure that this is a person that I feel comfortable with as a life partner. So every change in the direction of a godly nation is going to require other changes to make it easier to make that transition, to make it more sustainable. So I'm not worried about it. I don't think it's going to cause a crisis. I think there are going to be some growing pains along the way, but we put ourselves in this mess, and now we have to work our way out of it. So thanks for the video, and talk to you again, God willing.